समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
If you belong to a country that carries any weight in the world, then it doesn't matter which capital do you live in. It can be Washington, can be Beijing, definitely it can be New Delhi, most certainly for us and most importantly for us, it can be Moscow, London, Brussels, anywhere. Geopolitics, you will find, is like a T20 game now because asking rate and odds are changing every ball, not just every over, every ball, because big heads of state are meeting, they are speaking, and it looks like very often they are shifting the goalposts. Sometimes friends are becoming adversaries, adversaries are becoming friends. It's all happening at a very fast pace. I know by this time you've figured that the main context in which I am talking is the recently concluded Shanghai Cooperation Organization or SCO summit in Tianjin in China, in eastern China. However, there are also echoes from elsewhere because this was an event at which more than 20 heads of state met. 10 members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, 2 observers and 14 dialogue partners, right? Top leaders. And most importantly, India, China, Russia. They were there, Pakistan was there as well, but India, China, Russia, the 3 that matter to us and the 3 that also matter to most of the rest of the world. That's the reason the first echo, although indirectly so to this, has come from none else than Donald Trump as he's woken up. Because not only is this a T20 match, like a T20 match, it's also like a T20 match that's played across many time zones. That's the reason I said what's been happening right now is keeping people awake in capitals as far apart as Beijing in Washington in terms of time zones. So as Donald Trump woke up today, obviously he and his people have been following what's happening in Tianjin, and obviously what's happening is not making them happy because they've seen India now, at least for now, looking like finding a new warmth with China. There is no such thing as normalization with China because all statements that India and China issue, and I will read out the current latest ones to you, they always talk about a possible solution to the border issue on political direction. That's a long shot that's been talked about for a very long time. So fundamental problems between India and China persist. But if India, from being almost like an ally of the Americans in the Quad to balance China in the Indo-Pacific region, from that, if India is now furious with America, smarting under daily insults from people around Donald Trump, even from Donald Trump, remember he called India's economy a dead economy along with Russia's. If India in that situation now goes and talks warmly with Xi Jinping and issues these statements where it says, and that's a very important line that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has used, and that's been quoted by the ministry, our own Ministry of External Affairs, is read out on what he said. He has said that both countries, each country, that's China or India, should not see the other through the lens of a third country, through a third country relationship. Now, you might immediately think, oh, what this means is that China should not see its relationship with India in terms of what India's relationship with the US is. That Modi saying that is not going to please the Americans, it's going to worry the Americans. But more importantly, in our immediate context, what this also means is our Prime Minister saying that India should not view its relationship with China in terms of China's relationship with the third country. That third country, for heaven's sake, is not North Korea. It is Pakistan. So when you see India showing the willingness to make this kind of shift in its approach to China, then you can understand why the Americans have taken notice of it. So this morning, as we came to work, just after that, I presume that might have been the time when really early risers in America may have come to work, or maybe this was in the works yesterday, since last evening, because this was put out by the US Embassy today. So see this long statement from the US Embassy. This is a long rara statement apropos of nothing. There is no anniversary coming up. There is no Independence Day coming up. There is no visit coming up. This is with reference to nothing. But context we all know. So see this statement from the US Embassy. It's a very warm statement. It says the partnership between the US and India continues to reach new heights at this point. And this is the day when we Indians have woken up listening to one more of those offensive statements from Peter Navarro. This time he has said, look at India, it's a big democracy, but they are standing by while Brahmins are making all the profit from Russian oil. Now, some people have tried to be apologetic on his behalf, saying that he comes from New England, and there is the old Cambridge usage of the rich, of the elite as Boston Brahmins. That's what he means. I don't know. He could have then said Boston Brahmins or whatever. Besides the fact that his understanding of caste is all wrong, because even if he's referring to certain oil tycoons in India, he's got the caste all wrong. The last thing a foreigner should try to do, an American should try to do, unless you are an academic like Paul Brass or somebody, or like Lloyd and Susan Rudolph, really accomplished sociologists or political scientists, you should not mess with the caste business in India. So he said this morning, or what we saw this morning, is that Brahmins are making super profits from this Russian oil. But just after that, we saw this statement from the US Embassy that looks like an effort to pour oil over troubled waters. And what is the statement? The partnership between the US and India continues to reach new heights. It hasn't been reaching so lately. It's been hitting some new depths. It's been exploring some new depths for about 2.5 months now. And then it says, this is a defining relationship of the 21st century. That phrase has been rediscovered. It's not been reinvented. It was there. It's been invented a long time ago. It's been repeated many times, but now it's been rediscovered after about 6 weeks or 8 weeks of freeze. And then it says this is based on the usual platitudes, based on innovation and entrepreneurship, etc., to defense bilateral relationship. This tags along a quote from Marco Rubio. That again comes with reference to nothing. And that tweet says, the enduring friendship between our two peoples is the bedrock of our cooperation and propels us forward as we realize the tremendous potential of our economic relationship. That's come from Marco Rubio. So once again, looks like pouring oil over troubled waters, or at least looks like some new maneuver. Then this is followed by a long, as usual, nobody does pressy writing for Donald Trump, and he would not have passed UPSC. In the years when UPSC had a pressy writing paper, I don't know if it still has it. If they still have it, Donald Trump would never pass it, because he cannot write anything precisely. And you can see from his writing that he does it all by himself. So his long post, Truth Social post, please see that. I will read it for you. I may drop a sentence or two just by way of brevity, but see what he's saying and tell me if you see a change in the tone. Donald Trump says what few people understand is what few people understand. He's been repeating this for a long time, so I don't know how he thinks still only a few people understand, but nevertheless, he says what few people understand is that we do very little business with India. That's about $200 billion. That we do very little business with India, but they do a tremendous amount of business with us. In other words, they sell us massive amounts of goods. Their biggest client, and client is in quotes, but we sell them very little. Until now, a totally one-sided relationship. There's about a $45 billion trade surplus that India has with the US. It's not totally one-sided, but yes, India has a sizable surplus, but China has several X of that surplus with America. Then he says it has gone on for decades. The reason is that India has charged us until now such high tariffs, the most of any country. That's probably true in many areas for many products, that our businesses are unable to sell in India. That's also not untrue. It has been a totally one-sided disaster with one sign of exclamation. And any post from Trump, as it goes up, like a classical music raga, it goes up, it reaches towards its crescendo, the beat picks up, number of exclamation marks goes up. So this is the first exclamation mark, a single one after disaster. Then he says, also India buys most of its oil and military products from Russia. Not true, definitely not true of military products. We told you the other day that percentage has been declining quite rapidly, and from America it's increasing. However, there is a gap. Then he says very little from the US. They've now offered to cut their tariffs to nothing, right? But it's getting late. They should have done so years ago. Just some simple fact for people to ponder. Now tell me, what conclusions do you draw from this? And I will tell you mine. I've given you 5 seconds to think about. If you ask me, this is a bit like now trying to find another place from where to resume conversation with India. Saying that, look, I put you under pressure, I put you under the pump, I threw these tariffs at you, right? I was only making the point that you've been unfair to us all these years. You've already begun to do what I wanted. So one, he wants to declare victory at home by saying that because I put all this pressure, India is reducing its tariffs on our goods. India, by the way, just last week cut duties on all imported cotton. I get very confused because Americans say tariffs, in India we say duties, like customs duties. It's the same thing. So India cut its customs duties or tariffs on imported cotton to nothing, to zero. That is because Indian textile sector is suffering and India simply doesn't have enough cotton. Now, why India doesn't have enough cotton? India used to be a cotton exporter until 2013-14. That is something that we'll talk about. Maybe that is something that deserves an entire national interest this week or the next week. I will come back to you with that. But the fact is, India just cut those duties, and India has cut duties in many areas. So to his base, he wants to now declare victory. That's my interpretation. What does that mean? What that means is that possibly he wants to resume dialogue with India on trade. And what is it that he's telling India and to the rest of the world and also to his base? He's playing victim. He always plays victim. The expression he likes to use most often is unfair, very unfair, unfair to us. So you want to be at the same time the world's most preeminent superpower, which you are. At the same time, you also want to be the world's primary victim. But that is how his mega politics is done. Now, this is the only latest to cap what's been going on in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This was a busy weekend. We know that Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping met. Also, that Prime Minister Modi and Putin not only met, but they had an extraordinarily long meeting. First of all, their meeting was outside of Tianjin in some place. Some place means must be a convention place or a hotel or some venue or some official guest house type of venue. They decided to drive together, and it was a 50-minute drive. So it wasn't next door. It wasn't some outskirts of the city. It was some distance away. 50-minute drive, and they talked on that drive on the way. And then they had a long meeting, more than an hour-long meeting, and then joint statements were issued where the Prime Minister once again hailed the India-Russia relationship as a specially privileged strategic partnership where each country has stood by the other through times of crisis and hardship. So that is a very important statement. However, India and Russia do issue those statements every once in a while. That is truly a specially privileged partnership, although over the years it has declined in its importance, just as India's dependence on Russian weapon systems have declined. As I had mentioned to you in an earlier Cut the Clutter, from 72% of all of India's arms imports 10 years ago, Russia now accounts for exactly 36%, exactly half of 72%. And that percentage is declining as France, Israel, and the US are going up, and also India is getting more and more into the Make in India situation. Now, as far as the larger summit is concerned, first of all, we have to understand what Shanghai Cooperation Organization is. Shanghai Cooperation Organization came into being as Shanghai 5 in 1996. 1996 is when, this is 5 years after the end of the Cold War. And China and Russia both realized that this has become totally a unipolar world. America dominates everything. So this kind of a victory of the West, both countries are uneasy with. Putin's not there yet. Boris Yeltsin is there. China has Jiang Zemin. So 1996, they start talking about forming an organization of mainly Eurasian or Central Asian powers, that is Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. Subsequently, in the same year, they added Uzbekistan. So that became the founding group of SCO. Now, I know many questions have been raised about that family photo or group photo of all the heads of states attending this SCO summit. And people have said, oh, Narendra Modi is made to stand as far apart from Xi Jinping, the host, as the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. So that shows that the hosts give Indian Prime Minister only as much importance as the Pakistani Prime Minister. That picture needs to be understood in the light of what I just told you. The order of standing and seating is very simple. In the middle is the host, and in fact, in the middle are the two founders of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that is China and Russia. Now, on either side, there are two of the original founders. So 2 plus 2 plus 2, right? So Russia and China in the middle, two original founders on one side, two original founders on the other side. Then others who joined later, that's India and Pakistan, both joined later between 2015 and 2017. 2015 at Ufa in Russia, they were admitted to Shanghai Cooperation Organization as full members. They had become observers in 2005. Now they became full members. The first SCO summit that India and Pakistan attended as full members was at Astana in Kazakhstan in 2017. That's the reason the two are standing, Shehbaz Sharif and Narendra Modi are standing like that. And then you have other members who joined in later. Iran in 2023, that was the summit that took place in India, although it was a virtual summit. Then Belarus in Astana in 2024. So Astana had a summit in 2017, also in 2024. That's when Belarus also came in. So this then makes the 10 members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and that's what the front row in that picture tells you. Then you have Afghanistan, Mongolia as observers, and then dialogue partners. And these partners then include Turkey, for example, a very important country for us. And you also saw that picture of Narendra Modi walking up and shaking hands with Erdogan and also giving him a pat on the back. It's always good diplomacy to try and make friends with the friend of an enemy. Now, first, let's look at the larger statement. The larger statement, there is a celebration on the Indian side that there was a mention of Pahalgam. In the earlier meeting, in the defense ministers meeting, Shanghai Cooperation Organization defense ministers meeting preceding this summit, the countries could not agree on the wording of the para on terrorism because India wanted Pahalgam in, Pakistan did not want Pahalgam in. And that's why that was excluded. This time, there is a reference to terrorism in Pahalgam. However, SCO has done its own balancing. They put Pahalgam and also the two terror incidents in Pakistan's Balochistan, that is Jaffar Express. That's a well-known train massacre on 11th of March. And then Khuzdar killings on 21st of May. Khuzdar was where an army bus, Pakistani army bus carrying school children was bombed, and 4 school children at least, and 2 soldiers had died. So all of these have been condemned in a boilerplate statement condemning all forms of terror, etc., and demanding justice. So that done, member states have made some loaded statements. They've said, for example, member states oppose unilateral coercive measures, including those of an economic nature, that sanctions or tariffs, including those of an economic nature that contravene the UN Charter and other norms of international law, the rules and principles of the WTO, damaging the interests of international security, including its food and energy components, negatively affecting the global economy. This is a condemnation of Donald Trump and America. This is as clear as a condemnation as you can get. And this is a group that doesn't just have China, Russia, and many other countries, and also has India, which successive US presidents have hailed as a natural strategic partner, not an ally, a partner. This Indian presence here sort of resets the balance a little bit for the US and gives them something to think about. Nothing has changed. Don't go by the pictures that you see on your TV channels in fancy dress. Now AI has become a new danger because you have one like a Superman, one I don't know, like a Batman, Spider-Man, what? Putin, Xi Jinping and Modi all coming flying at you as if they will now go and grab hold of Donald Trump and bring him to his senses. No such thing is going to happen. There will be no Amar Akbar and Anthony unity in this case. Aisa kuch nahi hone wala hai. All three countries have their own interests. India and China have shared interests, but they also have shared hostility. And they also have very severe and deep differences. And it's not just the border, it's also the very special relationship that the Chinese have with Pakistan. That's why at the parade, at the 80th anniversary of what the Chinese call their victory against fascism and victory against the Japanese in the Second World War, India will not be present, but Pakistan will be present, and not just the Pakistani Prime Minister, but Asim Munir, Field Marshal, also will be present. And by the way, it's the first time that a Pakistani army chief is attending an SCO summit. But you know, with Munir, there will be a first time for many things. Aage dekhiye hota hai kya. So there is that special relationship, and India has fundamental issues with China, and that's why both sides have also said that we should not let differences become disputes. Similarly, while you might think that Russia and China are now ironclad friends and allies, it isn't quite true, because Chinese also worry about the Russians getting too friendly with North Koreans, who the Chinese see as their client state. And also Chinese worry about a moment when finally Putin and Trump will hug and embrace each other once again and make peace, because you can see that Trump actually quite likes Putin. In fact, I think his secret wish is to be like Putin, a leader like Putin, to have that kind of power. Now for China, it's a very important statement because they've coincided this with the 80th anniversary of their victory against the Japanese. Between China and Russia, they've been working on a different history. You can call it revisionist or whatever, but they have the right to do this. A different history of the Second World War, to try and make the point that this wasn't so much a victory of the West, but that it was a victory of Russia and China, that the two most important battles of the Second World War that defeated the Axis powers were fought by the Chinese against the Japanese and by the Russians that drove the Nazis away and devastated Hitler's armies. And that's why it's important to see what Xi Jinping said. He said, we must promote a correct historical perspective on World War II and oppose the Cold War mentality, bloc confrontation and bullying practices. All of this, the second part of this statement, is directed at the Trump administration because he's got his own problems there. At the same time, please don't think that he's going to go to war with Trump alongside you. He's got many more interests with Trump. He's got much more fish to fry with Trump than even you do, because China is an export-driven economy. China has nearly $1 trillion, in fact at this point more than $1 trillion plus of export surplus. Chinese economy will die without those exports. A large percentage of those exports and export surpluses are in China's trade with the US. The Chinese are not going to sacrifice that. They also have problems. Their real estate market is down. Their population is falling. They have many issues. So they are not going to go to war with America, and least of all for your sake or for Putin's sake. So these are three countries which have conflicting interests trilaterally within the three of them and also with each other at the same time. When you see this power group coming up there, this is not a new era Comecon. In 1949, the Soviet Union had tried to answer NATO by setting up Comecon. That was a group of socialist countries led by the Soviet Union. Comecon stood for Council of Mutual Economic Assistance. All the Warsaw Pact countries joined in, also Cuba, Vietnam and Mongolia are the quote-unquote socialist countries. So this is no Comecon of 2025. This is a bunch of countries who happen to be generally in a loosely defined geography, loosely defined Asian geography and then Eurasian geography. Those are the countries here. However, also remember that this grouping represents, I know this is a bit facetious of me to say, but I shall say it nevertheless because it's a good point, it's an interesting point to make, that this grouping represents more than two-thirds of all the nuclear weapons in the world. So this is a very powerful grouping. That is not to say that they are a bloc. They are not a bloc. But if you live in Washington, if you live in the White House, and you think that America is the captain of Team Universe, then this grouping is a very disturbing sight. It's a disturbing sight, also a distracting sight, because it says that even your friends are now seeing the percentage or seeing some gain in going and showing up at your biggest adversary's party. That is what it means for the US. For India specifically, there's no issue with Pakistan that will be discussed here. We'll see what happens later. But for India, the important thing is that the two leaders have made significant statements on the border issue. Prime Minister Modi, and this is from the readout given by the MEA, and I quote from the readout, the Prime Minister said that India and China both pursue strategic autonomy, and their relations should not be seen through a third country lens. That is something that I had explained to you earlier. And Xi Jinping said that India and China are partners, not rivals. These, mind you, are the statements that they issued or the readouts that their ministries or their governments issued after their bilateral meeting. This is not from the SCO plenary. This is after the bilateral meeting. And then Xi Jinping says they should share opportunities for each other's development rather than be threats. We should combine our strengths to maintain peace and tranquility in the border region and not allow the boundary question to define the overall China-India relationship. And then, of course, Xi Jinping talks about the dance of the dragon and the elephant. I would prefer the tiger in place of the elephant, but the Chinese have chosen this. It's their choice. Then again, I will quote from the Indian readout of the bilateral. It says they expressed commitment to a fair, reasonable, and a mutually acceptable resolution of the boundary question, proceeding from the political perspective of their overall bilateral relations and the long-term interest of two peoples. Now, you might think this is boilerplate, but I think it goes a little bit beyond boilerplate, because right now the two leaders are not talking about disengagement or de-escalation. That's been left to the special representatives. That was in the 10 points that came out after the special representatives meeting in New Delhi just the other day, which we had featured in a full CTC episode. So I would take that as read, and the two leaders are moving on from there and maybe thinking about a larger border deal between India and China. When that might happen, I don't know. But the prospects of that happening, I would say, are higher, maybe 2%, maybe 3% over the next 10 years or 5 years, are still higher than any settlement between India and Pakistan in the same time frame. Therefore, this line is important. Also, it says that the two leaders have given political and strategic direction to expand trade and investment ties and to reduce deficit. That is from India's point of view. India has a $110 billion deficit with China in our trade. They also say that the two economies, India's and China's, stabilize global trade. Once again, in conclusion, we were talking about what happened in eastern China in Tianjin, but we started with Washington. That itself explains to you the significance of what is playing out right now. Because once again, as I told you, there are areas of common interest between these countries. When I say these countries in this context, I only mean India, China, and Russia in Tianjin. All the others, from our point of view right now, do not matter. They also have their own interests vis-a-vis Washington. Washington itself has its interests with each one of these three powers. In many cases, those interests do not run parallel to each other. They also run contrary to each other. It is this complexity that this important game that's played out in Tianjin demonstrates to us.